Okay, so we'll start the next part of the lecture. We talked about helping, so let's turn the table here and talk about why people become aggressive. All right, so when it comes to aggression, why do people become aggressive? Okay, in general, there's a variety of motivators, things like anger, personality characteristics, their childhood, being exposed to violence, drugs and alcohol, jealousy, frustration, self-defense, peer pressure, culture, biology. And aggression in and of itself, it can range from anything from insults to threats, bullying, physical violence, everything to war, genocide if we want to. There's not one single aggressive gene. There's not one single aggressive personality, and there's not one single social cause. So we need to look at what features of the environment make aggression more or less likely. That's what we're interested in here. And how can social environments make harm toward an entire group seem acceptable? And that's where we'll talk about dehumanization. But first let's talk about what counts as aggression. So in social psychology, there's a couple of factors here that encompass aggression. There's behavior by a group or individual that's intended to harm somebody when the target is motivated to avoid that harm. So there's an intent to harm, and the other party does not want that harm. Harm upon another person that is trying to avoid that harm. Okay? The key here is intent. Not necessarily when it occurred, but the intent behind the action. So, example of, you know, somebody accidentally bumps you down the stairs. Harm? Yes, that is harm. But aggression? No. No, 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 no. They didn't intend to bump you down the stairs. So, yeah, they did harm you. They probably hurt you, but that was not aggressive. The aggression requires the intent. Okay? Dentist causes pain during a procedure. Intentional action, yeah, because literally they were doing the procedure. Intentional harm or aggression, no. The goal was the treatment. The intent was the treatment, not harm. So again, the intent has to be to harm somebody. Okay, let's say somebody tries to throw a punch at somebody. They don't make contact. There's no harm, there's no injury, but the intent was harm, and so we can count that as aggression. So the outcome is not important here. The intent is what is important. It's the intent to harm. And the target of that intent does want to avoid the harm. And so, again, this can include things that are physical, verbal, social relationships, even something like humiliation, intentionally spreading harmful rumors, exclusions. Is killing somebody in a video game aggression? Under the definition that we are using in social psychology, only in social psychology, no actual person is the target of harm. So we would not be able to qualify that. Is a football tackle aggression? Okay, there's physical force, but there are agreed upon rules, and the intent is to play a game, not to harm in most cases. The context does matter. It could become aggression if they're deliberately trying to injure an opponent. And again, also, aggression does not require anger. It's not the same as anger because you can feel furious and not be aggressive. And you can also behave aggressively without feeling angry. Okay, so this takes us to two different forms of aggression. We have hostile and instrumental aggression here. So, hostile aggression, the goal itself is to harm. Okay, I want to hurt you. It's often associated with anger, provocation, impulsivity. An example, okay, somebody's insulted at a bar. Person becomes enraged, punches the person. Okay? Sometimes this is called affective aggression because it's related to emotions. Very commonly reactive in nature. The primary goal is to harm. Okay, instrumental is a little bit different because aggression is the tool here. So things like robbery, intimidation, organized violence, if you're bullying for status, if you're trying to control somebody. And again, they don't have to hate the victim or be furious or lose control. That's what's important here. Hurting somebody, being aggressive and hurting somebody gets them something they want. Money, status, control, power. Both are aggression, but the motivation is different. Now, when people picture aggression, which one of these do they usually think of? They're probably thinking about hostile. People are angry, yelling, fighting. But instrumental aggression can be, again, that calculated, planned. You don't necessarily need emotions. And this will matter later in regard to dehumanization and harm because you don't necessarily need explosive anger to be aggressive and harm. Okay, so just a couple examples. Somebody punches somebody after an insult. That's going to be hostile. Somebody threatens somebody to get their wallet. That's instrumental. It's a means to an end. War, there's potentially a couple of different motives or forms. And we will talk about that to a certain degree. So aggression can be emotional, but it can also be very strategic in nature. So where does the capacity for aggression come from? And here I have a table, if you are interested in it, between the two types of aggression. So this is not a dichotomy. Nature and nurture in any class that I teach, there's not a dichotomy here. It's usually a combination of the two. But so it's usually going to be a combination of the two. Again, so is it learned or are humans born capable of it? And it is both. We have the capacity for aggression, but there is a lot of variation from person to person and situation to situation and culture to culture and historical period to historical period. And so that also suggests that environment is going to matter greatly. So some of the biological influences, I mean, they can be genetic, they can be neurobiological, hormonal, temperamental, or personality based. Testosterone also does not mean aggression, just so we're clear here. It's not an aggressive chemical necessarily. It's much more complex than that. Okay, the social environment, which plays a role also. If people learn when aggression is acceptable or who can be targeted or what aggressive behaviors are rewarded, that can enhance aggression. Norms matter enormously. What type of aggression is acceptable? There's some aggressive acts might be condemned in one place, but rewarded in another. So the capacity for aggression, it might be biological, but when the world around us helps teach us when, where, and toward whom aggression is acceptable, that enhances the propensity for us to be aggressive. It opens the door. It gives us the green light. So, in regard to modeling, we have Bandura's famous, Bandura, Ross, and Ross's famous study with the Bobo doll. This is a social learning and modeling study. But here's the setup here is that basically kids watched an adult model interact with a Bobo doll, and here you can see the way that one of the conditions, this is the aggressive condition that you can see in the GIF here. In that there was physical aggression toward the Bobo doll. The adult hit, kicked, struck, and verbally attacked the doll. Um, Very distinct aggressive acts. And then there was a control group in which the person did not attack, the adult did not attack the Bobo doll. Uh, so later, the kids had access to the Bobo doll and then other toys, and the researchers observed the behavior. And okay, if we talk about behaviorism from intro, you might think about like direct reinforcement. So again, what type of rewards or reinforcement might we would get from specific behaviors or punishment? But again, we have to think about like children themselves. They weren't getting rewarded for aggression during observation. So Bandura was interested, can behavior be learned vicariously simply by observing somebody else? Because social learning does dictate that observation and modeling can result in behavior. We don't have to personally experience every consequence at all. We do not have to take consequences into consideration. When we watch what others do, we watch what others do and what happens afterward and which behaviors appear to be acceptable or effective, we can take on or internalize those behaviors. And so if children imitate the exact aggressive behaviors they saw, why would that be convincing? So here's the thing in regard to this. What happened? And here is a child that did witness the aggressive experimental group. Children that were exposed to that, they did show more imitative aggression. They even reproduce specific acts, so specific acts that the adults had toward the Bobo doll, and specific verbal phrases that they used. The child used as well toward the Bobo doll. So they did specifically what the adult did. So the specific imitation is important, not simply because the kids, okay, became excited and reproduce producer model behavior, but they learned without, okay, they learned this goes above and beyond our operant conditioning. They were not rewarded. They were not told to imitate. They did not personally discover the behavior. All they did was watch. That's it. So, if we think about earlier in this course, we use others as social information. And again, we watch what other people do to see what is appropriate or behavior in certain situations. And just so we're clear here, the Bobo doll does not reflect real interpersonal violence necessarily, but it does demonstrate that observational learning of aggressive behavior, I mean, can be correlated with enhanced aggressive behavior as well. And again, so learning a behavior doesn't mean you'll necessarily do it. Learning does not mean performance. We can learn what to do, and we don't necessarily have to do it. But whether the behavior occurs depends on, again, consequences, what is considered normal, what's the situation, who was modeling the behavior, and what's our own motivation. And so this is much more than imitation. So with the observational learning, we just don't ask, what did they do? We also observe, okay, did it work? So with the aggressive model, um, did they get a specific status, get the desired object, get laughs, wins? Okay, so was it instrumental in nature? Did the aggression appear useful? Was the model punished? Were they rejected or disciplined? Were there consequences? So a child or anybody might have learned an aggressive response but chose not to perform it because maybe there would be punishment expected or the norms prohibited. So if you change the consequences or the norm, the behavior will change. And again, models don't have to be parents here. Peers, siblings, coaches, celebrities, teachers, um, pastors, government officials, online personalities, fictional characters, for God's sakes. But again, the model exposure, it's not deterministic in nature. It just increases the chances or decreases the chances of specific behaviors occurring. It's correlative in nature, not causal. Um, So again, going back to social norms, if everyone around me treats aggression as normal or funny or effective or admirable, then the social environment is teaching something just beyond the behavior itself is that this is an acceptable way to respond to things. If all I see growing up in response to frustration or unfortunate circumstances is aggressive behavior, that's all that I know. That's how I learn how to respond to those types of situations. And it's normal. That's what I learn. Even if it's not society wide, if that's what I learn in my own little bubble, that's what I learn is acceptable. Groups can normalize these things. They normalize what type of language we use, whether hostility is appropriate, whether we can mistreat certain people. And so the exposure to these behaviors, it can shift what feels acceptable. Okay, so observation isn't the only thing that can increase aggression here. Sometimes it starts with something a lot simpler. And this has to do with being blocked from getting what we want. So that is frustration. This is the frustration aggression model. And frustration occurs when something we want is blocked from us. We're blocked from obtaining some sort of goal. So we're trying to get somewhere and there is construction. Frustration. You're trying to submit an assignment. Canvas goes down. You're expecting a promotion. You're denied. You're interrupted in a conversation. You lose a game. You're rejected by somebody you like. Somebody cuts in line at the grocery store or the DMV. Oh my God. But the hypothesis here states that, I'm sorry, it's not funny, but oh my Lord. Um, frustration produces aggression. Okay, and that's very simple. But so every time you're frustrated, do you attack somebody? And the answer is no. So it's not that simple. The response to frustration can include a variety of things, and we hope that we go this direction, like problem solving. We just walk away. Maybe we're sad instead of frustrated. Maybe we use humor. Okay? Maybe we persist and try again. Maybe we seek support. So we could say that frustration can increase the likelihood of aggression, but it doesn't produce it. And aggression can occur without frustration too, just so we're clear here. But so it can't explain all aggression at all because we talked about instrumental aggression and that can be calculated and strategic. But nonetheless, this does provide a logical approach or one pathway to explaining aggression. And so, what does frustration do that can make aggression more likely? Like, how does this work? And again, it doesn't automatically cause aggression. I cannot say that enough. So Berkowitz kind of revised this model in that an aversive affect, the context determines response. So frustration can produce like negative emotions like anger, irritation, and distress, and sometimes arousal. So there's some sort of physiological arousal, like maybe a fight or flight experience that is um, activated. And this is what can make those aggressive responses more accessible to use. But it depends upon how we interpret the situation. So it depends on some cognition here. How do we interpret the situation? Do we interpret it as hostile or intentional or trying to provoke us? If so, aggression might be more likely. And so also in regard to the situation, okay, are we frustrated with maybe a professor or a friend or a stranger? And again, we're experiencing the same emotion, but depending upon who we are frustrated with may change whether we become aggressive or not, because there's different norms and consequences for being frustrated and then aggressive towards certain people. So these environmental cues might influence our interpretation and response and whether we actually become aggressive. So this might raise an interesting question in that can something in the environment make aggression more accessible, even if that object doesn't actually do anything? Okay, and so this is what Berkowitz and LePage actually tested. It's a weapons effect study. Okay, so The basic procedure was that participants were first made angry. They were provoked. And later, they had the opportunity to retaliate when they were provoked using shocks. Okay, so we can see that they were provoked, maybe frustrated, and later could act aggressively. Now, there's an environmental manipulation here between the groups. There was one group that in which they were presented weapons. Another group, there were no weapons. Now again, the weapons weren't used, they weren't related to the task, and they were just there. So, if aggression is determined only by how angry somebody is, then the objects in the room shouldn't matter. Everybody should be giving the same amount of shocks, regardless of whether the weapons are in the room. But here's Berkowitz's idea is that aggressive cues can activate aggression-related associations. So this is a good callback to priming and accessibility, and that the weapon can be associated or symbolize aggression, which could provoke aggressive related thoughts and possible responses as well, especially if somebody is already being provoked. So, in regard to this, um, this kind of brings up, okay, I'll go to the next slide in which we'll talk about the results. But this study, again, it did produce one of social psychology's most memorable favorite phrases. Here we go. So the finger pulls the trigger, but the trigger may also be pulling the finger. Okay? I know that might be controversial to some. Yeah, but here we are. Okay, so in regard to this, when the weapons were present, there were more shocks given. There were more shots given in the original study. Now, this is very meaningful because the weapon's irrelevant to the task. The weapon's just sitting there. So again, if both groups were provoked, and so technically both groups should give the same amount of shocks. So why would the group with the gun present give more shocks? And the basic idea is that yes, the people are provoked, and then there's that cue that symbolizes aggression. And so that makes aggression more accessible, enhancing the chances that somebody may act aggressively. So these aggressive cues and possibly a weapon like a gun might make aggression-related thoughts, feelings, and responses more acceptable or accessible and possibly more possible. Weapons like guns are culturally associated with aggression. So again, this doesn't mean if you see a gun, you become aggressive. That's way too simplistic. It depends on the context. These environmental cues can interact with a person's existing emotional state, which is highly provoked, and influence whether somebody responds aggressively. So, if we go back Bandura, what we observe can teach aggression. We talk about frustration, our internal state can increase aggression risk, and then the weapons effect, the environmental cues can make aggressive responses more accessible. So again, we're back to the person and the situation matter. Okay. Now, there's another popular belief about aggression that sounds intuitive, but research gives us a different answer. Okay. So we'll get through this part and then we'll take a break and come back. So I just need to get it out. All right. So in regard to this, how many of you have heard some version of, okay, we need to get our anger out? You just need to vent. Okay, we probably all have. This is known as the catharsis hypothesis. So here's the metaphor. It's just like an old hydraulic. Anger builds, pressure accumulates, aggressive expression can release it. And um, when you express that aggression, you should calm down, right? You get it all out, right? Yep, that sounds about right. Punch a pillow, punching bag. You scream, you vent, you break things. Okay, that should work, right? Oh, no. So if catharsis works again, you should feel better. But here's the thing, what if practicing aggression doesn't drain it? What if it actually does the opposite. So, yes, does venting aggression reduce it? Again, the answer is actually no. It does not reliably reduce later aggression. Okay? So, and as an example, if I punch something while I'm like replaying an insult somebody gave to me, I'm imagining that person, I'm rehearsing, like retaliating against them. What I'm doing is like I'm still attending to being provoked. I'm having aggressive thoughts, and I'm fight or flight is going, and I'm fighting. I'm not releasing anything. I'm practicing it. I'm practicing aggression, actually. I might temporarily feel a little bit better, but I'm actually reinforcing aggression. It's so practicing aggression, it's not the same thing as regulating behavior. So what tends to be more useful? Calming oneself down. Distance from the provocation, distracting it yourself, reappraising what actually happened, solving the problem, communicating in a non-aggressive way. And again, calming down does not suppressing your emotion. It's changing the arousal and interpretation and the behavioral response to something more appropriate. So, but we think that venting can work because the immediate action feels satisfying, and I mean, it feels like we feel better. And eventually we do calm down, and maybe we attribute that to the venting. And also, there is a cultural belief that if you just get it out, you'll feel better. But again, anger does not have to be spent through aggression. So we have biology, learning, frustration, aggressive cues, emotion, and social norms. Let's put it all together and we'll take a break. Okay. We put this all together. So we have the personal factors. Again, we have like attitudes, prior learning, temperament, what we think about aggression. We have the situation. Again, were we provoked? Are we frustrated? Are we stressed? Again, are we drunk? What are the group norms or social norms? That can influence what we're thinking in regard to, again, a provocation, like, oh my, they did that intentionally. That could spur something like anger. That's going to increase my heart rate. Then, okay, cognition comes into play. It could be quick or automatic, or again, we might be able to think it through and think, okay, nope, there's nothing personal here, just walk away, or we could just react. Now, the general aggression model, it does not say that these things happen and there's automatic aggression. There's an appraisal and decision process here. There is cognition that happens. Somebody can walk away, reinterpret the situation, confront it calmly, or just retaliate. And this gets back into automatic and controlled processing. And that initial appraisal is like, oh my God, they did that on purpose. But when we reappraise it, hold up, maybe it was an accident. Maybe they didn't mean to trip me. That can change the behavior. When we just slow down, we reappraise the situation using that system two thinking, which can change our overall behavior. And again, with this, the general aggression model, it doesn't indicate that it's that aggression is biology, learning, or the situation. It's all of them. So let's just talk about road rage here. Then I promise we'll take a break. So somebody cuts us off in traffic. Okay? That's a provocation. Gonna result in stress or frustration. Yeah, they did that on purpose. Okay, you feel anger. Your heart's gonna race. So there we go. There's the fight or flight. Now, cognitively, we're appraising like, okay, was that intentional or was it, could they have made a mistake? And depending upon that appraisal, that is going to dictate how we react. Maybe we honk, retaliate, maybe we just ignore it. This was a mistake. Or maybe we slow down. Oh my God, they made a mistake. They're having a horrible day. That appraisal is what is going to change the outcome. So I'm going to stop right there. We've gone much too long with this one. Hopefully that gives us a very succinct slash, I guess succinct overview of aggression. We'll talk about something a little bit more complex when we come back here. And